slightly, because I think that with this idea of competency and full protection, I think that we lean towards, well, what happens when, right? The what happens when scenarios of the non-normal world that we might interact with. And in non-normal, I'm in relationship, I'm talking about rescues. I believe that in the workshop that I attended with yourself, there was such I had this moment of great alignment. There wasn't, and I'm saying this in the best way, there wasn't a push for all this technology. Don't spend thousands of dollars on technology, but there was philosophy to the rescue scenario of what you're sharing. What
Yeah.
what do you consider as like the benchmarks or the touchstones of what a good rescue plan has?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Phil, because there's a push towards rescue. Everybody wants to incorporate rescue into their program because, hey, it's fun to train on, right? And it's fun to do, and they do have a lot of trick gear out there that you can do things with. But boiling down to reality, when something happens, if we can predict what's the most likely things that are going to happen. What are we really going to see on ropes courses? What kinds of incidents and accidents are we going to see? And then who is going to respond to those? And what is it that they're going to do? And those three things are really at the core of everything. But so often I think we have this mindset that, oh, I have to have a rescue kit and I have a rescue team and I have to have, and it's going to be all my best climbers and it's going to be all my strongest guys. And it's like, yeah, those guys aren't there every day. And they're probably going to be at another location in the property when this incident does happen. And so are they going to be able to get to this person, in a timely fashion? And so being able to think through probability and consequence. Everything in my head revolves around probability and consequence. What's likely to happen? And when that happens, how dire is the situation going to be? And who do I have on hand that can actually do something about it with the least amount of personal risk and personal intervention as possible? So, I don't know if that answers your question, but I think foundationally we have to think in terms of simplicity.
Mm-hmm. And the other component I often think of is, our rescue trainings, we get the same thing. We do a 4-day training, and people are thinking, oh, I'm going to come to this training, I'm going to cut some rope. There's this this assumption of this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to be the hero, right? You talked about
Right.
this, like there's a level of machismo which is unwarranted in the world of rescue.
Absolutely.
But we spend most of our time thinking about this continuum of rescue, that the last point on the very worst scenario of probability where all of the stars have aligned negatively, that this is where you might need this, an unconscious victim, unresponsive, lots of different factors gone into the play, but that there's this continuum. What do you consider as maybe the stepstones to an effective rescue in terms of like getting to what's the basics? What do we need to know if you're going to have a rescue plan? Not just knowing who, but what are some of those basic points that you need?
Sure. So, when somebody, sorry,
That's okay.
frog's got my throat. So when there's an incident on a ropes course or anywhere else for that matter, it's all about the subject, right? It's not about what equipment or systems we're going to use. It's not about Mighty Mouse coming to the rescue. It's about the poor guy who's hanging there with whatever's happened. Whether he just got frightened and is now clinging to something small, or he's had a medical event and he needs to get oxygen to his brain. It's all about the subject. And so the first thing that we have to be able to do is reach the subject. If we can't reach the subject somehow, then nothing else can progress from that point. So when we reach the subject, there's two things that we have to think about. There's two ways we can reach the subject. We can reach them verbally and we can reach them physically. So to reach them verbally, if they're awake, alert, and oriented, somebody from the ground can do that. And that can be actually happening even while a Mighty Mouse is getting themselves into position. So having multiple things being able to happen simultaneously is not a bad thing. But reaching that subject is the first point that we have to think about. The second thing that we have to think about is extricating the subject from whatever it is that they're going through. So if they're dangling from their harness, it's a whole lot different from if they're clinging to a pole. Whether you have to lift them out of their system or simply pry their fingers out of the wood, it might be a different kind of a rescue. So often when we think about extrication, we do think about cutting. Everybody wants to cut. I'm not one of those people who is absolutely diametrically opposed to cutting. I think that there's a time and place for everything, but I don't think that cutting should necessarily be your first thought when it comes to rescue. If there's another way to do it, if you can lift the subject off of their system and unclip them, that's obviously a smarter and safer way to do it. That said, if you've got your 98-pound summer person up there and a 220-pound person dangling there after their heart attack, what does that person need most? They need to get to the ground. They need to get to the hospital. And so being trained to cut if and when necessary, including having safety devices, either seatbelt cutter or trauma shears or whatever, using cutting devices that are going to prevent catastrophic failure, I think is an important consideration. But just automatically saying, we never cut, it's like, never say never, right? So we want to reach the person, then we need to extricate them. During that extrication, again, we need to remember that they're a human being. They're there. They either need some sort of medical intervention, whether that's psychological intervention or physical intervention or both. We do need to maintain that they need to be able to have an airway, and they need to be breathing, and they need to not be dripping blood, and so you need to be sure that your ABCs are taken care of, and you're not gonna reset any knees or shoulders while you're dangling there, but you can sure do no harm. So reaching them, extricating them from the situation that they're in, and then transporting them or evacuating them from wherever they are is again the next step. So you've got to get them out of extricate them from their predicament, and then evacuate them from the scene. Always, 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 I suggest that when a rescue starts, even if it's the simplest, most benign, this person's just dangling and they're panicked, but it looks like they might have had a medical situation or whatever, doesn't hurt to call 911, doesn't hurt to get them on the way, because so often we're in remote locations and it's going to be 20 minutes at best before somebody actually reaches your ropes course. And if you wait until you're certain that they really did chop off their pinky, darn it, now we're 30 minutes into the rescue and I just figured that out. Gee, we should call an ambulance. It's a little late by that point. So it's a lot easier. And having been an emergency services responder, I can tell you that I would much rather get started and be stood down than to be late to a rescue and to not be able to help as much as I could have if I'd have been there earlier, just because I was called late.
I wonder if you could talk to, because this will seem an obvious, maybe question of why do I need to have rescue trained staff on site? But often we might run into clients who say, well, firefighters, I can just call them. We're going to let the emergency services handle this. I wonder if you could talk to the hazards of leaving someone hanging in a position of compromised, as it maybe relates to things like suspension trauma and the realities of maybe being in a harness, and why you think that rescue training, even though the probability might be relatively low of something occurring, why you feel these things are important.
So the whole concept of this suspension trauma or suspension intolerance, it really came to light, some 20 years ago now. A fellow named Paul Seddon did some really good research actually on incidents that had happened, focusing around in France some cavers who would I guess cavers who had expired before rescue was able to reach them, with nothing wrong with them. They were just hanging in a harness. There's nothing wrong with these people physically, but they expired before rescue could reach them. And so stemming from that, he looked back at other incidents that had happened and other signs and symptoms of people who had been suspended for a prolonged period in a harness, and found that it really is not good for your body. Medically, nobody has there's several people that'll say they know exactly why, but they all differ from one another. Like there's a lot of different theories, which tells me that nobody really knows for sure. Some people say it's compression, and some people say that it's the blood flow, and some people, but it doesn't really matter physiologically what it is. We know that we need to get people out of that suspended condition. So what we find is that when a person is hanging in a harness, depending on the harness attachment point that they're hanging from, if they're attached dorsally, which in industry is typically how people are attached, they're attached from that back point, and in some of our ropes course situations, they're attached from that dorsal attachment as well. But if you've ever been hung from that dorsal attachment, you know that you're kind of hunched over, your diaphragm is compressed. If you're unconscious, your tongue is shifted forward in your mouth, and forward is not where it needs to be. That's what blocks your airway. So you're not in much of a breathing predicament. You're not in a good place to breathe when you're attached dorsally. When you're attached in the front, whether it's to your ventral or to your sternal, you are splayed open a little bit more. Your airway is a little more open. It's a little bit more conducive to survival. But again, you're not, you're still compromised. You're still, that just by being suspended, you are compromised. There was some research done at NIOSH by a lady named Nina Turner, this is several years ago, Matt, now maybe 10 years ago. And they used a tilt table to do positional, you took people's blood pressure in different positions, and then they hung people in harnesses and took their blood pressure while they were in different positions. And what they found is that there was some sort of traumatic response associated with being suspended for a period of time, unless two things: the knees were raised. So raising your knees for some reason seems to help, and pedaling your feet, moving your legs, wiggling your legs. So if you don't have your knees up around your waist, then the second best choice is to be able to pump your legs, stand up in an atria, or even just flex and unflex those legs. And so being able to move your legs somehow manages to stave off the effects of suspension intolerance or suspension trauma. That said, if somebody's unconscious, they're not going to be able to do pretty much either of those things. So what that means is we need to get that person down sooner than later. It used to be that we would teach, and this was based on a physician, I think out of England perhaps, who had suggested a position when you get a person to rescue, leave them in a seated position with their knees up, and not lay them flat for transport. That philosophy has since been disproven. So the medical community now says, no, transport them flat, transport them in an ambulance if you can, in case somebody does crash. You want ambulance there, but transport them flat, treat for shock just like you normally would, but monitor that person even for the next few days for tingling in their limbs, disoriented thinking, cramps in their legs or other parts of their body, or difficulty breathing. And all of those things can potentially arise even after the event, even hours to days after the person has been in a suspended condition.
Is there a concern over the potential of a spinal injury, or do we just assume that obviously suspension could lead to fatality, so maybe that serves a priority in terms of the hierarchy of needs, but when we're lowering someone to the ground, is being concerned with a spinal necessary, or do we not need to concern ourselves?
That's a really good question. I think that spinal precautions are always in order based on mechanism of injury, right? So if somebody has taken a whipper, we should take a certain amount of spinal precaution. That said, how much spinal precaution are you going to be able to take?
Yeah,
And are you going to do more
getting
harm
down to
than
them.
good? Yeah, are you going to do more harm than good trying to get somebody into a C-collar or getting somebody into a shortboard or a sked or something like that while they're suspended? Chances are you're not going to be able to do them a whole lot of good till you have them on the ground anyway. So doing that and stabilizing them as much as possible through the process is kind of a win-win in that situation.
Okay. Well, thank you, Louis, for joining me on this. I know we're come up to 50 minutes, so I do want to try to wrap this, but I could certainly stay on because I've been enamored with this conversation, and I just happened to look down at my time. Um, what I'm going to put out there, I'm going to say one last thing, and maybe this is a deeper philosophical point. We talked prior to the recording about just overall this industry. You've been in this field for longer than myself. Where do you this is a very deep one. I really want people to know about this field more than they know about this field. I find that for me, I've struggled with maybe sharing the whys or the what even I do. The elevator speech can be sometimes challenging. What's your perception on how the industry, how it might grow? Because you're very excited and passionate about this field, and no doubt as we talk about like this, wanting to share this information with people, I know that people listening to this might be interested in this stuff too. But how do you see the industry growing? This is a deeper philosophical, not just maybe ropes course, but maybe rope access in its entirety. Like,
Yeah, it's funny, working at height and playing at height changes people's lives. I mean, you talk to people who you would never imagine had ever done anything of the sort, and you find out that the highlight of their life was being on a zip line somewhere, or was climbing a climbing wall somewhere, or was mastering a ropes course that they went to at a camp, or and that stuff changes people's lives. That stuff, I mean, it's there's no wonder it's used in leadership seminars, in kids programs for growth, for relationship building. It's no wonder because it really does. It affects people in a place where they learn about themselves and they learn about connecting and honoring and trusting one another, which we don't get pushed to that edge very often in our normal society, do we? I mean, it's not the world that we live in. The most dangerous thing I do, I think, is drive home on the freeway every night. And there's not a lot of relationship happening there. But but I think that the potential for growth in this industry is huge. I think just specifically in terms of ropes course and challenge course, I think that challenge courses have the potential to be a significant part of any educational growth opportunity. Schools, universities, I think business places. I think the more that we can engage people in ropes course kinds of activities, the better they're going to be at whatever they do because of what it creates in themselves and in their relationships with others. That said, I also see that work at height is expanding and growing, and the opportunities for growth are just exponential there. It's funny, we've talked for 50 minutes or more, and we haven't even touched on rope access, um, and,
mhm.
and that's like my passion, aside from rescue. But rope access in and of itself has opened up doors to be able to work on and inspect and do structural modifications or uh, care of maintenance of parts of our world that were built hundreds of years ago, and we haven't touched since, right? The facades of ancient buildings in Europe, and bridges and towers that were built, the towers that transmit the electricity across our country, those haven't been touched in decades, some of them. And bridges, we know of the problems with bridges, and so all the inspections that are going on now, without rope access, we wouldn't be able to even think about touching or inspecting those things. Projects that once would have been ridiculously expensive or out of reach financially because of having to rig stage powered platforms or scaffolds. Now we don't need scaffolds or powered platforms, or we can do it with rope access, and we can do it safer than ever before in a 2-rope system. So I think that the opportunity for improved safety, improved efficiency, reduced cost, and the ability to access more places is higher now than it's ever been before.
That's a beautiful way to end this conversation, Loui. Thank you so much for sharing your passion, and hopefully other people are like just glowing with this residual passion that you're able to transmit.
Thank you.
If people want to reach out to Loui, I'm going to throw into the description of this podcast episode all of the information so you can reach out to Loui, and I encourage you to do so because I would say out of the entire conference, and the PVM part was just the day before the conference, I remember remarking to other people that I work with that I said, I've just met someone that I'm like so excited to connect with more. And that's the benefit for me for conferences. But I think that I just picked up on your passion, your expertise. And I was like, I don't know who Loui McCurley is. And that for me was a worry. And I was like, I need to know this person more.
Phil, thank you.
So I hope that other people listening to this maybe jumped into this episode and maybe didn't know who Loui is, and now has a little bit more of a touch point to be able to say, yes, this is someone I should know and learn more about. So thank you, Loui, for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me, Phil.
Awesome. You could stick around just briefly. I'm